Stop right there. You fit a description.
A description of what? What law are you saying I broke?
Don't worry about that. Just cooperate.
I'm asking for the legal reason you're stopping me.
Turn around. Put your hands behind your back.
I want the reason for this detention documented. I'm requesting a supervisor.
You're not in charge here.
Officer, listen carefully. I'm James Haynes. I'm a federal...
The first thing the body camera picked up wasn't a crime. It was an officer trying to force a story. Officer Caleb Rudd stopped James Haynes in a strip mall parking lot and immediately treated him like he'd been caught doing something. Rudd kept repeating one line that officers lean on when they don't want to explain themselves. James fit a description, no details, no specific crime, no clear reason for why James was being questioned or why the situation was turning into a detention. James did what most people think you should do in that moment. He stayed calm, answered basic questions, and asked one simple thing back. What's the legal reason for this stop? Rudd didn't give one. Instead, he acted like James asking questions was the problem. The more James tried to keep it normal, the more Rudd pushed it toward control. And within minutes, Rudd was talking like the arrest was already decided, like the outcome didn't depend on facts, only on James's compliance. That's what made this incident different. The body cam didn't just show what happened. It showed how quickly an assumption turned into force, and how a vague excuse was used to justify everything that came after. And then it got worse. Because Rudd didn't just detain James. He arrested him right there in the parking lot, while still refusing to clearly explain what law James had broken. And when James finally identified himself as a high-ranking federal official, Rudd mocked him on camera like it was a joke. That's the moment this went from another stop to something that could end a career. Tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you watch stories where cameras and accountability expose abuse of power, hit like and subscribe. Now let's rewind to how it started. It was late afternoon in Millstone, Georgia. James was walking across the lot toward his car. Nothing about what he was doing was illegal or unusual. Rudd pulled in and approached him like James didn't belong there and like the car couldn't possibly be his. James said the car was his. Rudd didn't accept it. He said James matched a description and started pressing him about why he was in that area and why he was near that vehicle. James asked what the description was and what he was being stopped for. Rudd kept it vague and didn't give a clear answer. That vagueness mattered. It meant Rudd was demanding compliance without giving James enough information to understand what he was even being accused of. James asked again for the legal reason and asked for a supervisor. Rudd treated that as not cooperating and escalated. Rudd put James in handcuffs during the stop. James didn't resist. He complied for safety, but he made it clear he wanted the reason for the detention, and the supervisor request documented. While being detained, James identified himself as a federal law enforcement executive. Rudd openly doubted him and mocked the claim instead of verifying first. James didn't argue back and didn't threaten. He pushed for dispatch verification. Dispatch took the information and started checking it. Rudd acted like it was a waste of time, like he already knew the truth. He kept James in cuffs and kept talking as if the verification was just another excuse James invented. Then the confirmation started coming back. You could hear the shift before Rudd admitted it. His voice changed, because dispatch wasn't treating it like a joke. They asked follow-up questions that only come up when the name and title match real records. They didn't say no match. They didn't say unknown. They treated it like a real identity that needed proper confirmation. Rudd tried to keep control anyway. He kept the cuffs on. He kept acting like he could still justify the stop if he talked fast enough. He started repeating the same vague reason again. James fit a description, but now he was saying it like a defense, not a fact. James didn't escalate. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue about Rudd's attitude. He just stayed on the point. There was no clear reason for the stop, no clear reason for the detention, and this was all being recorded. Dispatch came back with enough certainty that Rudd couldn't bluff anymore. The verification was real. James wasn't pretending. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't using a fake title to scare a small-town officer. He was exactly who he said he was. That's when Rudd's whole approach flipped. He stopped sounding confident and started sounding worried. He began talking like he wanted to rewind time. He tried to explain himself and soften it, like the problem was a misunderstanding instead of a baseless escalation. He started apologizing, not with accountability, with panic. The kind of apology that happens when someone realizes the wrong person is in cuffs and the record of it is locked in official footage. James didn't accept the emotional performance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Rudd. He stayed controlled and made the point that mattered. Rudd didn't need James's title to know he had no valid reason to arrest him. Rudd took the cuffs off fast. He started talking about procedure and being careful and calls we've had, trying to paint the stop as normal policing. But the body cam already showed the sequence. Vague claim, push for control, arrest without clear cause, then panic only after verification. A supervisor arrived late, because that's how it usually goes. Sergeant Lila Barrett stepped into a scene that was already burned into digital evidence. Rudd tried to brief her in a way that protected himself. He framed it like he was just checking something, and it got cleared up. Barrett didn't have the luxury of pretending it was nothing because James wasn't just mad. He was precise. He asked for names, badge numbers, the case number for the stop, the reason code for the detention. He asked how the description was generated and where it came from. Simple questions that expose whether the stop was real or improvised. Barrett tried to smooth it out. She tried the friendly tone. She tried the "we're sorry you felt disrespected" type language that departments use when they want the moment to end without admitting fault. James didn't play along. He made it clear he wanted the footage preserved, and he wanted the stop reviewed as a formal complaint, not handled as an awkward conversation in a parking lot. And before he left, he delivered one line that stayed with them because it was simple and hard to argue with. Rudd treated him like a threat until dispatch said he had a title. That was the whole case. James didn't treat it like a personal insult he needed to get over. He treated it like an official failure that needed a record. That night, he wrote down the timeline while it was fresh. Where it happened, the time window, what Rudd claimed, when the handcuffs went on, when dispatch verified his identity, when the supervisor arrived. He didn't add opinions. He wrote it like a report, because he knew exactly what departments do when facts are fuzzy. They rewrite them. The next morning, James filed a formal records request and a formal complaint. He asked for specific items, not whatever you have. He requested the full body cam video from Rudd, unedited, any other responding officer footage, the dispatch audio and CAD log for the incident, the stated description Rudd relied on, and the call that generated it, the incident report, and any supplemental notes, SARS. The policy sections Rudd claimed he was enforcing, that detail forced the department into a corner. If they delayed, it looked like a cover-up. If they complied, the footage would show exactly what happened. At first, the department tried to handle it the way small departments often do. Quiet, informal, contained. A couple of phone calls. Let's talk this out. A suggestion that it was a misunderstanding. James didn't do the friendly meeting. He kept it on paper. He also asked for a review of Rudd's stop history and complaint history. Not rumors. Actual documentation. Traffic stops, pedestrian stops, use of force reports, and citizen complaints tied to Rudd's badge number. That's when the department's mood changed. Because a single bad stop is something they can try to spin as training. A pattern is something they can't. Over the next 2 weeks, the footage came in, along with the logs. The body cam showed the most damaging parts clearly. The vague, fit a description, the refusal to explain, the quick move into control, the arrest without a clear stated crime, and the tone change only after dispatch confirmed James's identity. James didn't post it himself. He didn't need to. He forwarded everything to an attorney, Nia Kincaid, who treated it like a case from day one. Kincaid didn't start with social media. She started with policy and records. The department resisted parts of it. They tried the standard move: privacy excuses, partial releases, delays. But James's request wasn't coming from someone guessing. It was built to force compliance. Then, the internal review produced something the town couldn't dismiss. Rudd had been complained about before, not once, multiple times. The complaints followed the same shape: stops based on not belonging, vague suspicion, escalation when questioned, and a tendency to treat black drivers and pedestrians as automatically dishonest. Some complaints hadn't been formally sustained, but the wording was familiar. A pattern of reports that were always inconclusive, always insufficient, always filed away. And there were notes showing supervisors knew he was a problem and kept him on the street anyway. Not because they had proof he was clean, but because dealing with it would mean admitting the department had been ignoring it. Once Kincaid had enough, she made it real. She sent a notice to preserve evidence and warned them not to delete or overwrite footage. She referenced the timestamps, the CAD entry, the specific Bodycam file ID. She basically told them, if anything goes missing, it becomes another case. That's when Officer Rudd got pulled off patrol. At first it was labeled Administrative Leave Pending Review, because departments always try to make it sound neutral. But in town, people noticed quickly. The same officer who used to sit in that strip mall lot wasn't there anymore. And then the story leaked anyway. Not because James went hunting for attention, because witnesses were already there that day. Somebody recorded a piece of it on a phone. Somebody told a family member. Somebody posted a short clip with the claim that a black man got cuffed for walking to his own car. When the clip started moving, the department didn't control the narrative anymore. Now it wasn't just James versus Rudd. It was the footage versus the department. After the stop, James filed a formal complaint and requested the body cam footage, dispatch logs, and the stated description Officer Rudd claimed. The department tried to keep it quiet and slow walk it, but a short witness clip from the parking lot showed up online and spread through local groups. Once it went public, people in town split fast. Some defended Rudd as doing his job. Others pointed out the same thing the footage showed. Rudd treated James as suspicious first, and only changed his tone after dispatch verified who James was. More residents started sharing similar experiences with Rudd: vague, fit-a-description stops, aggressive detention when questioned, and complaints that went nowhere. That forced the police chief to respond publicly, but the department's statements stayed generic. Under review, we take it seriously, wait for the facts. The problem was the facts were already recorded. By the end of that week, the issue wasn't just the parking lot arrest anymore. It was the department's pattern: prior complaints, weak supervision, and a system that only reacted once the wrong person got targeted, and the video was impossible to ignore. After the clip spread, the department tried to contain it with generic statements and behind-the-scenes outreach. They wanted a quiet conversation before it turned into a formal case. James didn't do informal meetings. Through his attorney, Nia Kincaid, he kept everything on record and demanded the basics: the full body cam footage, dispatch logs, the exact description Rudd claimed, and the justification for the detention and arrest. When those records were reviewed, the department couldn't produce a solid, specific basis that matched what happened on camera. The internal investigation then expanded from one bad stop to supervision and history, because the paperwork showed Rudd had prior complaints and questionable stops that had been minimized or closed without real action. By the end of this phase, Rudd was pulled deeper into an official review, and the department was under pressure to either discipline him seriously or admit they'd ignored a pattern for years. The internal review didn't end with another vague training issue. It got forced into a decision. The body cam footage, dispatch logs, and Rudd's report were compared side by side. The department couldn't keep pretending it was a normal stop that simply went sideways. The timeline showed the stop started on suspicion without a clear, specific reason, then escalated when James asked basic questions, and ended only after identity verification made the mistake impossible to deny. That created two problems for the department. One, the stop and arrest didn't have a clean legal basis on record. Two, Rudd's written explanation didn't match the best evidence. Once that second issue showed up, it stopped being about tone. It became about whether the officer's paperwork could be trusted. Chief Harold Baines had to choose: protect the department's image short term or protect the department legally long term. Quietly keeping Rudd would mean future cases could get challenged using this incident. Prosecutors hate officers with credibility issues. Civil attorneys love them. So the department moved. Rudd was called in for a formal interview. He tried to defend himself, the way officers often do when the facts are bad, by leaning on general terms: officer safety, suspicious behavior, refusal to comply. But those phrases didn't line up cleanly with what was actually recorded. The more he talked, the more it sounded like he was trying to justify a decision he made early. Then they pulled his history again, with fresh eyes. Stops with vague reasons, complaints that matched the same pattern, supervisors who wrote notes but never escalated discipline. The town had treated it like, that's just how he is. Now it was a documented liability. At the same time, Kincaid pushed hard on the department's exposure. She made it clear they weren't only looking at Rudd. They were looking at the department's failure to act on earlier warnings. That's what turns a case from an incident into a practice. Baines tried one more containment move. He offered policy changes and a private resolution. But Kincaid tied any resolution to real consequences and an official finding, not a handshake. By the end of the review period, the department did what small departments do when they need to show action without admitting the whole culture is broken. They prepared to discipline Rudd publicly and frame it as an exception. Rudd was notified that his conduct during the stop, the escalation, and the arrest decision were under sustained findings. The department also flagged inconsistencies between his report and the footage as a separate issue. That's when Rudd finally realized something. The badge wasn't going to save him. The recording was stronger than his version of events. After the investigation, the department issued sustained findings tied to the stop and arrest, and they moved to remove Officer Caleb Rudd from the street. Internally, they treated it as a damage control decision. Rudd had become a liability because the body cam footage and logs didn't support his justification, and his report didn't match the recording clearly enough to defend him. Rudd was either pushed to resign or face termination, and the department prepared a decertification referral to the State Standards Board, so he couldn't quietly move to the next agency without the incident following him. At the same time, James and his attorney made it clear they weren't accepting a simple bad officer explanation. They demanded the department address the pattern that allowed repeated complaints to be ignored, including supervision failures and stop documentation practices. This set up the next phase: whether the town would accept real policy changes and oversight, or just remove one officer and keep everything else the same. In the weeks after Rudd was removed, the incident didn't fade. It spread through the region because people recognized the pattern: a vague stop, fast escalation, then excuses after the fact. James's attorney collected additional statements from residents who had had similar encounters and used them to show the problem wasn't isolated. That pressure pushed the town into public meetings, records disclosures, and formal questions about complaint handling and supervision. The department started making short-term changes to reduce blowback. More supervisor involvement on stops that turn into cuffs, stricter report review, and clearer rules about when fit a description is valid versus when it's just a cover for bias. For James, the short-term aftermath was simple. He got validation on paper, not just apologies. And he made sure the case stayed official so it couldn't be quietly buried. Now here's the question for you. If you were James, Would you have stayed quiet after the apology, or would you have requested the footage and pushed for a full review? And if you've ever had a stop where the reason stayed vague, what happened after? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share the story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real modern stories where accountability actually lands.
All right, names and IDs right now.
We can show our employee IDs on our phones and call
Yeah.
our supervisor. You can verify in 2
No,
minutes.
I said IDs, not your
We're
phone.
right outside our workplace. What specific issue are you investigating?
I got a complaint and you look suspicious. That's enough.
A complaint about what
So you're
crime? If you-
refusing.
if-
This was the kind of stop that only existed because an officer decided it should. In a parking lot outside a work site in Pennsylvania, Officer Whitlock stood in front of a small group of workers and kept demanding names and identification. She said they looked suspicious and claimed one of them didn't have an ID badge visible. The workers stayed calm and tried to solve it quickly. They offered to show their employee IDs on their phones and offered their supervisors contact info so the officer could confirm they belonged there. Whitlock refused what they offered. She talked over them and repeated the same demand for names and ID, like the only acceptable outcome was full compliance on her terms. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. State or country. And if you like stories where, calm facts, recording, and oversight beat bad policing, hit like and subscribe. Now here's how it started. It was a normal shift window near a large industrial site. Not a quiet back road, not a high crime scene. Just a workplace area with employee parking, a sidewalk leading toward the building, and people moving in and out around break time. Most workers had badges on lanyards or clipped to their shirts, but the site also used phone-based employee ID screens because not everyone kept a plastic badge visible every second. Frank Coleman was with 2 coworkers, Maya Singh and Luis Ramirez. They had just walked out of the building area toward the lot. They weren't running, they weren't hiding, they weren't bothering anyone. They were doing what workers do every day, moving between their cars, the entrance, and the break area. Officer Whitlock rolled up and approached like she had already decided there was a problem. She told them there had been a complaint about suspicious people near the site. She focused on one detail and tried to make it the whole justification. She claimed one of them didn't have a badge visible. Luis immediately tried to make it easy. He offered to pull up his employee ID on his phone and offered to call their supervisor so the officer could verify the shift in names. Maya backed that up and pointed out they were right outside their workplace during a normal shift window. Whitlock ignored the verification they offered and repeated that she needed their names and physical ID. She treated the phone IDs like they didn't count and treated the supervisor contact like a delay tactic. She kept the conversation one way, like the goal wasn't to confirm anything. It was to collect information. The workers didn't raise their voices. They didn't insult her. They didn't step toward her. They stayed where they were and kept their hands visible. They repeated their offer to verify employment and asked what specific issue she was investigating. Whitlock kept saying she had a complaint and kept leaning on the word suspicious. The problem was she still didn't connect it to a specific suspected crime. She didn't describe a theft report, trespass report, assault report, or anything concrete. She just kept acting like the complaint itself gave her authority to demand whatever she wanted. Frank recognized where it was going. He didn't argue in circles. He challenged it calmly and stayed focused on one point. Pennsylvania didn't have a general rule that let police force someone to identify themselves just because an officer asked. He explained that without a lawful reason tied to a specific suspected crime, she couldn't demand names and ID like it was mandatory. Whitlock didn't respond by stating a crime. She responded by pushing harder. She talked over him and tried to frame his explanation as refusal. She treated calm legal knowledge like disrespect. That's when the power game became obvious. Whitlock wasn't trying to confirm whether they were employees. She had been offered a clean, easy confirmation twice. She wanted control of the interaction, and she wanted names, because names let her run checks and build a record. Frank and the others weren't trying to win an argument. They were trying to keep it lawful and keep it calm, while also not giving up rights just to end an uncomfortable moment. Maya quietly did the smart thing people do now. She started recording on her phone without announcing it, not to provoke, not to go viral, just to keep the exact words and timing from getting rewritten later. Whitlock noticed the phones. She didn't like it. Her tone sharpened. She repeated the demand for names again, louder, and she stepped closer like she was trying to make backing down feel impossible. Luis tried once more to de-escalate by offering the supervisor number. He told Whitlock she could call right then and get confirmation. Whitlock refused again and kept insisting on ID first. At that point, the stop wasn't moving toward resolution. It was moving toward escalation without a clear legal foundation. And the next thing Whitlock did was what forced the situation into a higher level. She called for a supervisor and started acting like the workers were the problem for not handing over information they didn't legally have to give. Whitlock tried to turn a simple workplace check into a detention without saying the word detention. She stepped closer and repeated the demand for names and ID, faster and louder, talking over the workers whenever they tried to answer. She kept pointing to the missing visible badge like it proved wrongdoing, even though the workers kept offering the same easy verification: phone employee IDs and a supervisor call. Frank stayed calm and did not match her tone. He kept the conversation on one track. He told her they were willing to confirm employment, but she still needed a lawful reason tied to a specific suspected crime before forcing identification. He asked her what crime she was investigating. Whitlock went back to the same line about a complaint. She still did not state what crime was suspected. She did not say that there was a theft report, trespass report, or any specific victim complaint. She used the complaint as a shield so she could keep demanding ID. Maya kept recording. She didn't step forward. She didn't narrate. She just held the phone low and steady so the audio caught Whitlock talking over them and refusing their verification options. Luis tried one more time to end it clean. He offered to call their shift supervisor on speaker right there. He offered to show the supervisor's text thread in the schedule. Whitlock refused again and told him she needed government ID and names first. She treated everything the workers offered as not good enough, even though it would have answered her stated concern immediately. That's the part that mattered. She wasn't acting like someone trying to confirm who they were. She was acting like someone trying to take control and collect information. Whitlock then tried to box them in by making it sound like they were required to comply. She said they had to give names because she asked. She talked like refusal would become a problem by itself. Frank didn't argue back and forth. He stayed respectful and kept repeating the legal point. Pennsylvania did not have a general stop and identify requirement for people who were not suspected of a specific crime, and a vague complaint wasn't enough by itself. Whitlock responded by shifting the pressure onto him. She framed his explanation as refusing and tried to make it sound like he was being difficult. She attempted to create a new justification out of his calm pushback. Then she made the move officers make when they want leverage without having a charge. She told them to stay where they were while she checked things out. She started using hold-on language and positioning herself to keep them from walking away, while still not stating an actual legal reason for detention. Maya's recording captured that shift, and it was clear why it mattered. A casual contact is optional. A detention isn't. Whitlock was sliding it into a detention without saying the legal reason out loud. Luis asked again what crime was being investigated. Whitlock repeated the complaint line and pointed again to the badge issue. She still didn't connect it to a specific offense. Frank kept his voice steady. He told her they were not trying to obstruct anything. They were offering verification, but they were not going to hand over personal ID just because she demanded it without stating a lawful basis. Whitlock got more irritated, and instead of accepting the supervisor call, she finally called for her own supervisor. She did it like she expected backup to force compliance. While they waited, the workers stayed put to avoid giving her an excuse to claim they fled. They kept hands visible. They kept recording. They kept offering the same verification options. Whitlock kept refusing. A few minutes later, a patrol supervisor arrived. He didn't come in yelling. He came in trying to understand what he was walking into. Whitlock immediately tried to frame it as a simple situation where workers were refusing to identify themselves. She leaned hard on the missing visible badge and the complaint. She talked like that automatically justified ID demands. The supervisor asked the basic question Whitlock hadn't answered. What specific suspected crime was being investigated? Whitlock didn't give a clean answer. She stayed vague and repeated the same points. The supervisor then turned to the workers. Frank and Luis explained they were employees, offered to show phone IDs and contact their shift supervisor, and explained their understanding of the law. Without a lawful reason tied to a specific suspected crime, they did not have to provide government ID or names on demand. The supervisor looked at the situation and made the practical call. He accepted the verification route Whitlock had refused. He allowed the workers to show employee IDs on their phones and allowed the supervisor contact to confirm they belonged there. Once that happened, the entire suspicious claim collapsed in real time. With confirmation available and no specific crime stated, there was no reason to keep pushing names and ID like it was mandatory. The supervisor told Whitlock to end the stop. Whitlock backed off, unhappy, but she couldn't keep it going without creating an even clearer violation on camera. The workers walked away without incident. And now they had a recording of the entire thing. Whitlock's repeated demands, her refusal to accept reasonable verification, her inability to state a specific suspected crime. And the moment a supervisor stepped in and agreed the workers didn't have to provide ID in that situation. The workers didn't treat it like a bad vibe and move on. They treated it like a documented incident. Right after the stop, Frank and Maya wrote down what mattered while it was fresh. The time, location, Whitlock's name and badge number, and the key problem. She demanded names and ID without stating a specific suspected crime, refused reasonable verification, and escalated by trying to hold them there. Luis contacted their shift supervisor, Tom Heller, and told him what happened. Heller already knew the basics because the police supervisor had accepted the workplace verification and ended the stop. Now Heller went one step further. He emailed site security and asked them to preserve any exterior camera footage from the time window. He also requested any gate logs or employee access records that showed the workers were where they were supposed to be. The workers filed a complaint with the police department. They kept it clean and specific about what happened. They also included something that usually changes how a complaint is handled. They disclosed that the entire interaction was recorded on a phone and that the worksite likely had security footage. They didn't threaten. They just made it clear the facts could be verified. That forced the department to pull Whitlock's body camera. When Internal Affairs reviewed the footage, it showed the same problem the workers described. The stop started with suspicion based on appearance and a badge visibility claim. Whitlock demanded names and ID, talked over their verification offers, and kept leaning on a complaint without connecting it to a specific suspected crime. When the workers stayed calm and explained the legal limit, she responded by escalating tone and pressure instead of stating lawful grounds. The department also reviewed the supervisor's body cam. That footage mattered because it showed the correction happening on scene. The supervisor accepted the workplace verification route and ended the ID demand, confirming the worker's point that this was not a situation where forced identification was required. Then the department asked for outside footage. The worksite provided exterior video showing the workers walking normally in an employee area during a normal shift window. It did not support any claim that they were trespassing, hiding, or acting like suspects. It also supported the workers' statement that Whitlock chose them first and built reasons after. Once investigators had all three pieces, phone recording, Whitlock's body cam, and security footage, the complaint stopped being about attitude and became about procedure. Internal affairs did what they always do next. They checked whether this was a one-time mistake or a pattern. They pulled Whitlock's recent stops and body cam clips for the same markers. Vague, suspicious reasoning lash ID demands without stating a specific suspected crime. Refusal to accept reasonable verification. Escalations framed as non-compliance. Talking over people instead of explaining lawful basis. They also checked her reports for the same wording patterns and whether her written narratives matched video. The pattern was consistent enough that the department couldn't treat it as a single misunderstanding. It looked like a habit. She treated compliance as a proof of innocence and treated refusal as a reason to escalate, even when the law didn't support forcing ID. That's what made the review move fast. Not because of social media, not because the workers were famous, because the evidence was clear and the behavior repeated. By the time Whitlock was interviewed internally, she couldn't rely on the usual defenses. The recordings showed she had been offered verification and rejected it. The supervisor's footage showed the stop had no solid footing, and the review of prior incidents suggested this wasn't new. Within weeks, the department made a decision. They terminated Officer Whitlock for how she handled the stop, escalating without articulating a specific suspected crime, refusing reasonable verification, and creating an unlawful pressure situation that a supervisor had to correct on scene. And that firing wasn't the end of it for the workers. Because once the department admits an officer's conduct was improper in a recorded stop, other people who had similar encounters start coming forward, and the department has to answer whether it ignored those earlier, too. After Whitlock was terminated, the department tried to keep it quiet at first, but the workers' complaint had recordings, a supervisor correction on Bodycam, and outside security footage. That combination doesn't stay internal for long. Frank and the others didn't go looking for attention. They just wanted the record to be accurate and the conduct addressed. What surprised them was how many people started reaching out once word got around at the site. Other workers mentioned similar stops in the same area, being questioned for no clear reason, being asked for names, being treated like they had to prove they belonged. Some people said they complied just to end it. Some said they didn't complain because they assumed nothing would happen. Now something had happened. The department's leadership had to answer a simple question internally. If a supervisor on scene acknowledged the stop had no solid legal basis, why did it take a formal complaint and a full review to stop this type of approach from repeating? So the department did what it usually does after an officer gets fired for a recorded stop. It tightened procedures and tried to reduce exposure. They pushed changes that were practical and easy to enforce. Officers had to clearly state the reason for a stop tied to a specific suspected crime when demanding identification. Training was updated to make the difference clear between a voluntary contact and a detention, especially in workplace and public settings. Report writing rules were tightened, so officers couldn't write vague narratives that didn't match video. The worksite also made changes, not because the workers had done anything wrong, but because they didn't want random patrol stops becoming a regular risk. For the workers, the main impact was simple. They learned that staying calm and documenting the right details matters more than trying to win in the moment. Frank talked about it later like this. Whitlock had been offered multiple ways to confirm they were employees. She refused those options because she wanted control, not confirmation. The supervisor ended it because there was no legal foundation to keep it going. Maya kept her recording saved even after the firing because she understood something important. The system changes only when people can show exactly what happened, in order without exaggeration. Louise said the biggest lesson was that the moment you start talking over someone and ignoring verification, you're not investigating anymore. You're just trying to force submission. The story ended with a clear result. The officer lost her job because she escalated without articulating a specific suspected crime and refused reasonable verification while treating compliance like proof of innocence. And the bigger point was what the supervisor proved on scene. If the law doesn't give an officer authority to force identification, the officer doesn't get to create that authority by being louder. Now, I want to ask you, if you were one of those workers, would you have handed over ID just to end it? Or would you have held the line calmly like they did? Drop your answer in the comments. Share this with someone who works in a place where police roll through like this. And if you want more real-world accountability stories told clearly, like the video and subscribe.
Stand up. I need your ID.
What's the legal reason you need my ID?
There was a complaint. Do what I'm telling you.
A complaint about what crime?
Last time. Stand up and come outside with me.
My name is Malcolm Reed. I'm a federal judge.
That doesn't matter. Stand up.
The situation started inside a downtown cafe and ended in a federal case because everything was recorded. It began mid-conflict. A local police officer stood over a black man sitting alone, demanded identification, and told him to stand up. The man stayed seated, kept his hands visible, and asked the only questions that mattered: whether he was being detained and what the legal reason was. The officer didn't give a clear legal reason. He kept pressing like the demand was enough by itself. The room got quiet fast. People weren't even pretending it was normal anymore. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, country or state. And if you like stories where power gets checked by video, paperwork, and real consequences, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind to how it started. It was a weekday morning at Harbor and Stone, one of those downtown cafes that stayed busy from open to lunch. People came in for coffee, sat with laptops, took meetings in low voices. It wasn't chaotic, it was routine. The cafe had security cameras pointed at the entrance, counter, and seating area. The manager, Alyssa Park, liked clean operations and clean records. She ran the place like a system because that's how you avoid problems. Malcolm Reed walked in like a regular customer. Plain jacket, no suit, no badge, no sign of status. He ordered black coffee and sat near the window with a book. Nobody in the cafe knew he was a federal judge. He wasn't carrying himself like he wanted attention. He was off duty and staying off the radar on purpose. Outside, Officer Brent Kessler was working a downtown patrol shift, not an emergency response, not a call that required speed. It was the type of patrol where officers look for something. Stops, contacts, IDs, questions. Activity that looks good in numbers. Kessler entered the cafe with his body camera running. He didn't stop at the counter. He didn't ask staff if there was an issue. He scanned the room and walked straight to Reed. From the start, he approached like Reed was already a problem. He stood too close to the table and angled his body to control the space. Customers noticed because it wasn't a casual check-in. It looked like the beginning of a removal. Kessler told Reed there had been a complaint about a suspicious person sitting in the cafe. He demanded identification and acted like it was required. He didn't explain what crime was being investigated. He didn't give a description Reed supposedly matched. He used vague wording that gave him room to change his story later. Reed stayed calm and kept it simple. He didn't argue back and forth. He asked if he was being detained. He asked what the legal basis was for the ID demand. He asked if he was free to keep sitting there. Kessler didn't answer directly. He repeated the demand, then tightened his tone. The problem for Kessler was that Reed wasn't panicking and wasn't performing fear. He was responding like someone who knew the rules and needed the officer to state them. That alone made Kessler escalate. Alyssa, the manager, noticed immediately because she watched the room for trouble. She walked over and asked what was going on. She told Kessler the staff hadn't called on Reed. She also mentioned the cafe had security cameras. Kessler dismissed her and told her to step back. He treated it like the cafe was a stage he controlled, not a business he was entering. That changed the dynamic because now it wasn't just Reed and Kessler. Now there was staff, customers, and multiple recordings. Reed continued staying steady. He kept his hands visible. He stayed seated. He asked for the officer's name and badge number. He asked again if he was being detained and why. Kessler started building reasons on the fly. He implied Reed was not cooperating. He hinted that refusal itself was suspicious. He framed basic questions as attitude. He didn't lock into one clear justification because he didn't have one. Reed didn't reveal who he was. He didn't pull rank. He didn't try to embarrass the officer in front of the cafe. He let the officer talk and push because every extra step without legal cause made the record stronger. And that's why this incident didn't disappear like most do, because Kessler had a body camera running. The cafe had security footage from multiple angles, and Reed wasn't trying to win the moment. He was letting the officer create a trail. After Kessler planted himself at Reed's table, he stopped acting like he was checking on a complaint and started acting like he was running a removal. He kept ordering Reed to stand up and go outside with him. Reed stayed seated and kept the same calm pattern, hands visible, voice level, asking if he was being detained and what crime was being investigated. Kessler didn't lock into one reason. He stayed vague on purpose. He leaned on suspicious and treated Reed's questions like the problem. You could see it happening in real time. The officer wanted compliance first, and he was trying to invent a clean explanation after. Alyssa, the manager, came back over because it was obvious this was getting worse, not better. She told Kessler the staff hadn't requested police help and Reed wasn't causing an issue. She also pointed out the cafe had cameras. Kessler brushed her off and told her to back up. That wasn't a small detail. It showed he wasn't there to resolve something for the business. He was there to control Reed. Customers started paying closer attention. Not because Reed was loud, he wasn't. It was because Kessler was making it a scene. People recognized the pattern. Officer leaning in, demanding ID, pushing movement, then getting irritated when the person didn't fold. Kessler tried a new angle and acted like Reed had to step outside right now. Reed didn't move. He asked whether it was an order and what authority it was under. That's when Kessler started talking like Reed was refusing lawful commands, even though he still hadn't stated a clear lawful basis for detaining him. Then Kessler made it personal in a coded way. He implied Reed didn't belong there and treated Reed's calm, informed responses as suspicious. It wasn't a slur, but it was the kind of line that tells everyone exactly what's driving the stop. Right after that, Kessler put hands on Reed. He grabbed Reed's wrist and tried to pull his arm back like he was moving into restraints. Reed didn't swing, shove, or jump up. He stayed controlled and didn't give Kessler anything that could later be labeled as aggression. He kept repeating the same questions and kept his posture steady. That moment was captured from 3 angles that mattered. Kessler's body camera, which recorded the officer's own words and shifting explanations. The cafe's security cameras, which showed the full scene and who was escalating. At least one customer recording quietly from nearby, which added an independent view in case anything went missing later. Alyssa stopped trying to debate Kessler and switched to documentation. She had staff call for a supervisor. She also pulled up the camera system at the counter and made sure the time window was locked in her head. She was already thinking about preserving video, even if she didn't say it like that. When Sergeant Holbrook arrived, the tone changed slightly, but not because the situation was suddenly legal. It changed because the department didn't want this getting worse in public. Kessler gave Holbrook a quick explanation that still didn't include a clear crime. He leaned on vague language and made Reed sound like the obstacle. Holbrook then spoke with Reed and got a short, factual account. Reed was sitting, Kessler demanded ID without stating a legal reason, and the interaction escalated when Reed asked basic detention questions. Holbrook tried to end it fast. She pushed for the easy outcome where Reed would just show ID and the officers could walk out, calling it a successful contact. Reed didn't take that exit. He stayed calm and kept the same line. He would follow lawful orders, but they needed to state the legal basis. Holbrook then tried another exit, asking Reed to leave the cafe to avoid further issues. Reed asked whether he was being ordered out and whether the business had asked for him to be removed. Alyssa answered clearly that Reed was welcome and not trespassed. That cut off one of the usual cover stories. At that point, Holbrook made the practical decision to stop the bleeding. She told Kessler to disengage. Kessler backed off, still acting like he was the one choosing to end it. Reed didn't argue, didn't lecture, didn't reveal who he was. He kept it procedural. He asked for names and badge numbers. He confirmed the body camera was recording. He asked how to request the incident report and related footage. Then Reed made the move that mattered most for what came later. He asked Alyssa in front of both officers to preserve the cafe's security footage from before Kessler entered until after he left, and to keep it secured. Alyssa agreed immediately. Kessler and Holbrook left. Reed stayed. He finished his coffee. Then he wrote down a clean timeline while it was still fresh. What Kessler claimed, what he demanded, how the reason kept shifting, when he put hands on Reed, and what the supervisor did when she arrived. Reed still didn't reveal his identity that day. He let the department think this would fade out like most complaints do, because the next part wasn't about the cafe anymore. It was about video reports and whether the officer's story could survive review. Reed didn't go online and rant. He didn't call a reporter. He handled it the way a case gets handled when you want consequences. The same day, he wrote down a clean timeline while it was fresh. When Kessler entered, what he claimed, when he demanded ID, when he tried to force Reed outside, when he put hands on him, and when Holbrook arrived and shut it down. Names, badge numbers, and the fact that multiple cameras captured it. Then he locked down the footage. He didn't rely on the police department to keep it safe. He worked directly with Alyssa. She exported the cafe video from multiple angles and saved it in more than one place. She also documented the time window and kept a basic record of who handled the file. Again, not dramatic, just enough that nobody could later say it was altered or not available. Reed also submitted formal preservation requests for the department side: body camera, dispatch logs, CAD notes, radio traffic, and the final report plus any edits. He did it in a way that created a paper trail. That matters because it prevents the usual excuse of, "It was overwritten," or "We didn't know you wanted it." About a week later, the department did what departments usually do first. They relied on the officer's written report. Kessler's report tried to make the stop look clean. It used broad language: suspicious behavior, refusal to identify, safety concerns, disturbance. It was written to justify everything after the fact. Then the video got pulled. Body camera showed the stop started with a demand for ID before Kessler could clearly explain a specific crime. It showed Kessler switching reasons as Reed kept asking the same basic legal questions. It also captured the coded line that revealed motive and the moment Kessler went hands-on. Then the cafe footage got compared to it. The cafe angle showed the whole room. Reed seated and calm, Kessler crowding him and raising the pressure, staff saying they hadn't called, and customers reacting only after Kessler escalated. The wide view also showed how Kessler tried to control the space and push Reed toward the door. Once you have that combo, body cam plus third-party security, there's no "he said, she said." It becomes sequence and proof. That's when this stopped being a normal internal complaint, because reviewers noticed something else. The paperwork started changing. A revised report version showed up with cleaner justification language than the first version. Small wording changes, but important ones. Written like someone realized video existed and tried to make the narrative match what the officer wished had happened. That raised a bigger question: who edited it, when, and why? And once that question exists, the review expands fast. Reed's identity still wasn't public, but the complaint landed where it mattered. Not because he was a judge, but because the evidence was strong and the handling looked suspicious. The case got referred beyond the local level. Federal civil rights investigators opened a review. They didn't start with politics, they started with patterns. They pulled Kessler's prior stops and checked for repeats. Stops based on vague, suspicious language. ID demands, without clear cause, stated reports describing non-compliance while video showed calm behavior, repeated stops on the same type of people in the same areas, similar wording across reports like it was copied and pasted. Then they widened to Kessler's unit. Same patterns showed up across multiple officers, similar stop reasons, similar escalation points, similar report language, similar complaints that had been dismissed locally. The investigators also checked evidence handling and video integrity. They looked at upload times, access logs, missing segments, and whether footage was reviewed before reports were finalized. Because if a report is written like a script and the footage has gaps right where the script matters, that's not a mistake. That's misconduct. As the review widened, the local department tried to contain it. You always see the same move. Talk about training, talk about policy, talk about isolated incidents. But the federal team wasn't there for PR. They started interviewing people from previous stops. Some had never been believed. Some had taken pleas because fighting seemed impossible. Some had filed complaints and got ignored. Now investigators were matching their stories to video and paperwork. And once those cases got rechecked, the pattern became obvious. Stops without legal basis, pressure tactics, and reports written to justify whatever the officers decided to do. By the time subpoenas went out, Kessler's situation changed overnight. Now it wasn't a complaint. It was a federal inquiry with multiple incidents attached. And here's the key. At that stage, the worst thing an officer can do is try to fix evidence. Because the moment investigators see report manipulation, missing footage, or inconsistent file logs, it turns into criminal exposure, not just a policy violation. Kessler and his unit were now under that spotlight. Reed stayed quiet publicly and let the process work, because the story wasn't about one morning anymore. It was about how many mornings like that had been happening before anyone had the proof stacked this clean. Once the federal review widened past Reed's stop, the local department stopped treating it like a complaint and started treating it like damage control. Internal Affairs pulled Kessler off street work first. Then they suspended him. The unit he worked with got restricted too, because investigators weren't just looking at one incident anymore. They were looking at whether this was routine. Kessler tried to survive it the way people in that position often try, by sticking to the report and acting like the video could be explained away. But the problem was that there wasn't just one video. There was body camera footage showing shifting reasons and pressure tactics. There was cafe security footage showing the full scene and the fact Reed was calm and seated while Kessler escalated. There were witnesses. And then there was the paperwork trail, showing the report language changed after the fact. That last part is what turned a bad stop into criminal exposure. Because now the issue wasn't only the stop, it was the handling of evidence and official records. Federal prosecutors built the case around two big buckets. 1. Civil rights violations. They focused on unlawful detention and escalation without legal cause, and on using authority to pressure compliance without stating a valid basis. They treated Reed's case as the clearest example, but they didn't leave it at that. They connected it to other stops where the same patterns showed up. Vague suspicion, Idaho demands, escalating language, and then a report that turned it into non-compliance. 2. Evidence tampering, just falsification. This is where Kessler ran out of room. Investigators traced report edits, timing, and access. They compared report claims to what the video actually showed. They also looked at whether files were mishandled or whether details were added later to make actions look legal. At that point, the city's options narrowed. The department terminated Kessler. They tried to separate themselves from him publicly, but the federal case kept reaching back into the unit's history. People from older stops started getting calls. Some had cases reopened. Some had charges reviewed. Some had convictions questioned. Because if your stop practices are unconstitutional and your reporting is unreliable, the system can't pretend those cases are solid. When the case went to court, it wasn't presented as a viral moment. It was presented as a timeline. Here's what Kessler claimed. Here's what the camera captured. Here's what changed in the report. Here's the pattern across other stops. Here's what that pattern did to real people. Reed didn't center himself. He gave controlled testimony when required, stayed factual, and let the video do the work. The point wasn't that a judge was targeted. The point was that a citizen was targeted, and the only reason it couldn't be buried was because the citizen had the knowledge and discipline to document it correctly. The verdict and sentencing phase hit hard because it wasn't based on emotion. It was based on proof and repeat conduct. The judge in the criminal case treated it as a serious abuse of government power, not a bad day, not training issues, a willful pattern tied to falsified official actions. Kessler was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. That sentence became national news because it's rare to see that level of time given for this type of misconduct, especially when departments usually try to end these stories with resignations or quiet settlements. This one didn't end quietly because the evidence didn't leave room for a soft landing. Some cases connected to the unit were thrown out or reevaluated. Some people got their records corrected, some got settlements. The city paid, but the bigger cost was credibility. And Reed, he didn't do the victory lap. He went back to his life, and he kept the same approach that made the whole case possible. Calm, lawful, documented. He didn't win because he was powerful in the moment. He won because he refused to let power rewrite reality afterward. That's what made this a national example. Authority looks unstoppable when nobody checks it. It collapses when the facts are recorded, preserved, and reviewed by people who can't ignore them. Now, I want to ask you, if you were in that cafe, would you have recorded? Would you have spoken up as a witness? Or would you have stayed quiet and hoped it ended fast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs it. And if you want more real accountability stories told clearly like this, make sure you like and subscribe.
What's the reason for the stop?
I already told you, swerving, no signal.
That's not clear. I want a supervisor, please.
No supervisor's coming.
So you're refusing my request for a supervisor?
I'm the most senior officer out here.
Officer, this is escalating for no reason. I'm FBI.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
So this traffic stop went bad fast. The patrol officer walked up to the driver's window and started giving commands immediately. He told the driver to open all the windows and stop using his phone. When the driver kept recording, the officer mocked him for it and called him a TikTok weirdo. The driver stayed calm and asked why he was being pulled over. The officer said he already explained it and accused the driver of swerving and failing to signal. The driver asked again because the explanation still wasn't clear, and then he requested a supervisor. The officer refused. He said no supervisor was coming and claimed he was the most senior officer on the road. Then he told the driver he could make his life difficult and said he enjoyed doing that. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you want to see people stay calm and protect themselves the right way, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind. The driver was Edward Reed, mid-30s, black, professional, and careful with his words. He worked federal law enforcement. He had been driving home in Florida after a long day, staying normal in traffic, not speeding, not acting reckless. When he noticed a patrol car behind him, he got even more careful. He signaled, stayed steady, and then the lights still came on. Edward pulled over cleanly, turned the car off, and kept his hands visible. He didn't start reaching for documents. He waited. He started recording because he wanted a full record of the stop. Officer Darren Klein approached with a hard tone from the start. He focused on control first, not explanation. He kept pushing Edward to stop recording and kept treating basic questions like disrespect. After the supervisor request, Klein escalated. He ordered Edward out of the car. Edward complied slowly and clearly, keeping his hands visible and following instructions. Klein then started a search. He moved through it like he expected to find something serious, not like a normal traffic stop. While searching, he kept pushing accusations, suggesting criminal activity, and questioning Edward's intent, even though Edward wasn't resisting and kept answering in a controlled way. Then Edward told the officer he had a firearm on him. That changed the stop immediately. Klein commanded Edward to raise his hands and treated the disclosure like a threat instead of a legal safety notice. Edward explained he was legally armed and had a Florida carry permit. Klein didn't accept that. He questioned whether the permit was real and kept pressing accusations like Edward was lying. During the search and detention, Edward finally identified himself as FBI and explained that his credentials were on him. Klein still didn't ease up. He said people pretend to be law enforcement and kept Edward detained while he continued checking and searching. Klein took the FBI's statement like it was another excuse. He kept Edward detained and kept control of the space while he demanded the credentials. Edward told him where they were and stayed still while Klein retrieved them. Klein checked the ID like he expected it to be fake, then stepped away to verify it through dispatch. Backup arrived while Klein was verifying. The second officer pulled in because of the weapon call and the way Klein had framed the stop. Edward stayed calm, hands visible, and didn't argue with the backup. He kept repeating the same points. He was legally armed, he disclosed it, and he was federal law enforcement. Dispatch confirmed the credentials. That's when Klein's tone changed, but not the attitude. He acknowledged Edward was FBI, then immediately complained that Edward should have said it earlier. Edward responded that he did try, but Klein kept cutting him off and kept escalating before he could get a full sentence out. Klein didn't address the earlier threats or the mocking. He shifted into excuses and warnings. He talked about people pretending to be law enforcement and tried to make the detention sound like normal caution. Then he started undoing the escalation. He told backup they were clear, canceled additional units that were still coming, and stopped treating it like a felony stop. He returned the credentials and moved back toward his cruiser. Edward asked if he was being cited or charged with anything. Klein didn't write a ticket. He didn't give a warning slip. He ended it with a vague statement about driving carefully and then told Edward he was free to go. Edward left without charges, but the stop didn't end clean. Klein looked angry walking away, like he'd been forced to back off, not like he'd realized he crossed a line. After Edward drove off, he didn't just forget it. He pulled into a nearby lot and documented everything while it was fresh. Time, location, unit info, what was said, and the order of events. He made sure his recording saved because he already knew how quickly stories get rewritten once reports start. Within an hour of getting home, Edward treated the stop like a formal incident, not a bad interaction. He didn't post it immediately. He didn't call friends to rant. He made copies of the video, saved it in 2 places, and wrote down a clean timeline. When the lights came on, when the officer started issuing commands, when the threats happened, when the search started, when he disclosed the firearm, when he said he was FBI, when dispatch confirmed it, and when he was released. The next morning, Edward did 3 practical things. First, he requested preservation of records. He wanted the officer's body cam, dash cam, dispatch audio, and any CAD notes locked in so nothing could be overwritten or missing. Second, he notified his chain of command, not in an emotional way, just facts. He explained that he was detained at gunpoint level intensity after a legal firearm disclosure, that the officer ignored identification until he felt like verifying it, and that threats were made during the stop. Third, he filed a complaint with the local department's internal affairs. He didn't write a long speech. He listed the statements, the actions, and the outcome. No citation, no charge, no clear basis for the search, and a stop that escalated after he requested a supervisor. Because of who Edward was, this didn't sit in a generic inbox. His supervisor took it seriously, not because Edward was important, but because the stop created risk. A local officer escalating like that against a compliant, legally armed person could get someone hurt, and the threats on camera weren't something a department could easily brush off if it got out. A few days later, Internal Affairs contacted Edward to confirm basic details and request his copy of the recording. Edward agreed, but only after he confirmed they were also preserving their own footage. He wasn't going to hand over the only clean record and hope the rest showed up. At the same time, The department pulled Klein's body cam and dash cam. They also pulled the radio traffic and the backup officer's footage. And when all of that got reviewed together, the pattern was hard to ignore. Klein escalated early over-recording. He made a direct threat about making Edward's life difficult. He refused a supervisor request while claiming nobody outranked him. He pushed criminal accusations without evidence. He treated a legal firearm disclosure like proof of wrongdoing. He doubted federal credentials even after Edward explained what he was and where the ID was. He ended the stop with no ticket and no charge. That last part mattered because it made the reason for the stop look weaker. Departments can defend a tough stop when it ends with a clear violation. It's harder when the officer found nothing and still went that far. Officer Perez also got interviewed because she was backup and she witnessed the later part. She didn't have to call Klein racist or abusive. She only had to confirm the basics. Edward was calm, compliant, and not acting like a threat. Not long after that, the department made quiet moves. Klein was pulled from road duty temporarily while the review continued. No public announcement, just schedule changes, different assignment, less time behind the wheel. Then Edward heard through official channels that the department was treating the complaint as sustained misconduct on at least some points. The biggest one was the threat. Saying you love making people's lives difficult isn't a tone issue. It's an abuse of authority statement, especially during a stop. The firearm part also became a focus. Florida has a lot of lawful carriers, and law enforcement training is supposed to cover safe handling of disclosures without turning every armed citizen into a criminal story. The footage showed Edward disclose calmly, and the escalation still happened. And while the investigation ran, the recording started to spread anyway. Not because Edward chased clout, because somebody always shares it. A clip got out showing the mocking about recording and the threat. It circulated fast because it was simple and clear. Officer mocks a driver for recording, then threatens him. Then later finds out he detained FBI. The department went into damage control mode, not panic, just the standard playbook. Say it's under review, say they take conduct seriously, avoid details, and wait for the storm to pass. But this one didn't fully pass because the evidence was too clean and the ending was too obvious. No charges. The department couldn't ignore it for long, not with internal affairs already involved, and a clip circulating that showed the threat and the attitude. Klein got called in for a formal interview, not a casual talk. A recorded statement with policies in front of him. They went through it in order: why he stopped the car, why he escalated over the phone recording, why he refused a supervisor request, why he threatened to make the driver's life difficult, why he searched, and why he kept pushing criminal accusations after finding nothing. Klein tried the usual defenses. He leaned on officer safety. He leaned on driver was argumentative. He leaned on I didn't know who he was. He leaned on people impersonate law enforcement. But none of those answers covered the threat. None of them explained the mocking. None of them explained why a traffic stop ended with no citation, but still turned into a detention with backup. And the recordings didn't match his tone on paper. Internal affairs didn't need to prove what was in his head. They only needed to document what he said and did. That's enough for policy violations. The outcome wasn't some movie ending. It was the kind of accountability that actually happens. Klein received discipline for conduct during the stop. The threat line became the center of it because it was clear and it was recorded. He was removed from solo road duty for a period and reassigned. Training and review were ordered, not optional. His stops and body cam usage were flagged for closer supervision for a while after. At the same time, the department made small policy adjustments that looked like training updates, but they were a response to this exact incident. Officers were reminded that civilians can record and that it's not a reason to escalate. Supervisors weren't allowed to be unavailable just because an officer didn't want oversight. Firearm disclosure procedures were emphasized again, especially in a state where legal carry is common. Edward didn't treat that as a victory parade. He treated it like a case closing. He kept everything: his recording, the timeline, the complaint number, and every email. He also made it clear through his chain of command that he wasn't asking for special treatment. He was asking for the same thing any driver should get: a lawful stop, clear communication, and no threats. The interagency part stayed tense. Klein didn't reach out to apologize. There wasn't any "we're all on the same team" moment. What Edward got was something more useful: a documented record that the stop was handled wrong and a change in how that officer was allowed to operate. And that mattered because it wasn't just about Edward. If Klein talked like that to a federal agent on camera, there was no reason to believe he was calmer with regular people who didn't have credentials or a chain of command behind them. That's why the paperwork mattered. That's why the recordings mattered. That's why Edward didn't let it end at "you're free to go." The last piece was what Edward did publicly. He didn't dump a full video online with a dramatic caption. He shared what needed to be shared when it made sense, and he kept it focused on conduct and procedure, not personal attacks, not internet revenge. The point was simple: recording is protection, and threats from authority should never be treated as normal. So here's the question for you. If you were Edward, would you have kept recording and stayed calm the same way? Or would you have reacted differently when the officer started mocking and threatening you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real modern stories where people hold their ground the right way, make sure you subscribe.